Hi, everybody. Welcome to Astropath's latest video. Today, Laurie and I are going to talk about the Gemini season, which is coming up. Before we get into that, I just want to mention that Astropath is a combination of Laurie Farrington's work, and you can find Laurie at lauriefarrington.com, and myself, my work, Jenny Date, and you can find me at hiddenpathastrology.com. So we together make Astropath, and we're really excited to continue offering these videos. We've had a real uptick in the number of folks watching, so thank you for that. We super appreciate it. It's awesome. It's fun to be answering those comments and find out more about what's happening in all of your lives. So keep that coming. That's great. So please, like us, follow us, share the content if you like it. That's great. We appreciate you doing all those things. And before we get even further into things, I guess I just want to say I have meditations that I'm starting to post on this channel as well. So if you're a meditator, check those out. They go with the zodiac season. I'm kind of a wellness astrologer. I'm really thinking about how to use these things in a practical, physical way. So that's a lot of what my focus is. I do have some other offerings that I've been in the process of creating, but not much else to report yet. Do sign up for my newsletter if you want to get it every week. And Lori, what do you have? You've got all kinds of cool stuff going on. What's going on with you?
Oh, I don't know, it's all kind of crazy. There's always a lot going on. I've got a book coming out at the end of the year, but that's still quite
Hey.
a ways in the future. But yeah, do sign up for my weekly blog posts as well. And I have local things going on, Mid-Coast Maine. If you're in the local area, please be in touch and I can give you more information about some of the local events going on. And I will be, yeah, just be in touch. I've got things happening.
Yeah, cool. Yeah,
I,
I'm excited for all those events that you're staffing. I think those will be fun. So
yeah, yeah, it's
yeah,
exciting.
cool.
It's exciting,
Uh,
really,
yeah.
really, I'm focusing a lot on building local community. And my focus with astrology has always been to make it practical and make it accessible to everybody. That's really always been my focus.
Awesome. Cool. Well, let's talk about this Gemini season. So when is it, Lori? What are we talking about?
Oh, Gemini season. Let's see. Gemini season starts when the sun moves into Gemini on May 20th, and the sun will remain in Gemini until June 20th. Now, one thing to think about is that the seasons are the astrological seasons contribute to the seasons spring, summer, fall, and winter in the Northern Hemisphere. And it is very much based on the Northern Hemisphere perspective. But spring season starts with Aries. That's the beginning of spring. The middle of spring is the Taurus season. So this, as the sun moves into Gemini, we're coming into the last part of spring. So now we're really, headed toward the summer season. Things are really gearing up to move into that direction. The final month, the final season in each season is the mutable sign. So that is the change. It's like bringing us from spring toward summer. So that's,
Awesome.
and Gemini is, it's a mutable sign. It's very activated and changeable. And I think, and it's a air sign. So it's all an intellectual sign. It's, I feel like the thing that I always think of with Gemini is curiosity. It's a time to be really curious about where we are and what's coming next. It's a very fun sign.
hmm Yeah, I like to think about Gemini. I always think one way to understand it is to think about honeybees,
Oh yeah.
buzzing into one flower and then they buzz into the next one. And the whole time they gather nectar and then they gather pollen, excuse me, and then they bring it to the next place, to the next flower. And they're really responsible for sharing information, is how you can think about it. Because really, in each kernel of pollen is information, genetic information is being brought to the next plant. So I really like thinking about Gemini in that way. It's quick, it's moving really fast. It kind of comes under fire for being too fast sometimes, or it can be accused of being shallow because it's moving so quickly. It goes from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. But I always think of these things as a spectrum. And the really cool thing about Gemini is it is responsible for transmitting that information. So you can think about the teachers and the storytellers in our society, the people who know how to network. Those are all kind of Gemini archetypes you can think about to understand the energy better. But it's a great sign because it's got a light touch. It can move from from place to place, and we all need that. Things can be heavy and challenging and ugh, and you just come in with that like Gemini light touch, and it just kind of lifts everything up. It brings things into a more social dynamic. So those are some of my key thoughts about it. Do you have others too, or?
Yeah, well, always remembering that Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So it is that gathering of information, just like you've been talking about. And I love that you brought in the archetypes, the storyteller, the journalist, all of those kind of ideas of gathering information. I like Stephen Forrest in The Inner Sky talked about an explosion in a jigsaw puzzle factory and the twins gathering up all the pieces. And I always kind of think of that. I always have that image in my mind when I think about Gemini, but it is such a sign of gathering and spreading information. So, looking in your own chart at using whole sign houses, you can look and determine exactly where that is in your chart and understand where you carry that energy. And when we get into the individual impacts, that's what we'll be working with as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I was reading an older astrology book recently, and learned something different about Gemini in that book, which was really cool, which is the idea that Gemini can actually go even deeper into topics than any other sign, even than Scorpio, because it's not tied down to emotions. It can just kind of, with that intellectual kind of witness point of view, it can go into these really deep places and just pull out information. And so from a kind of a research point of view or a gathering information point of view, that's really helpful. I mean, as a wellness astrologer, I feel like emotions are really important and our feelings are really important. But there's something to be said for the capacity to really understand things in the mental space, but with that ability to go into those deeper realms. And actually, even in mythology, Mercury that rules Gemini can go into the underworld. It can go up to the top of Mount Olympus, and it can deal with all the daily stuff. So there's a wider net here that Gemini can be responsible for, which I really liked.
I
Yeah,
love it that you brought that up. I think that's so important to understand because Gemini is often accused of being superficial and not being able to go deep. And it is interesting because yeah, the ability to go deep with a light touch, with
yeah.
being able to hold powerful information without getting suffocated by it, holding a light touch. Similar to, Aquarius, that it's different, but it's an air sign as well. So that's an important thing. I'm glad you brought that up. That's great.
Yeah, and just, curiosity is super helpful. I mean, I kind of remember when I first heard that, I was like, yeah, whatever, curiosity. And like, no, curiosity is great. It's a very important tool to
Very.
have in your toolbox, when
It's
things are
very important.
challenging, right? I mean, I just think it's helpful. So,
Yeah. And
cool.
bringing that up, I remember, I think it's Elizabeth Gilbert talked about the importance of curiosity in terms of, people are always saying things like, follow your passion, and not everybody has a passion. So what do? You follow your curiosity, and looking and finding where Gemini is in your chart is a way to, where is your curiosity? Where does your where Gemini is a place in your life that you're going to have a lot of curiosity. And if you follow your curiosity, you're going to find the things that really spark your attention. So I love that when Elizabeth Gilbert talked about that, following your curiosity. It's
Mhm.
a powerful thing to do because it will bring you to all kinds of places.
Yeah, cool. Well, I guess, do you want to talk more about the season? Should we open up the chart or?
Oh, let's open up the chart. I think we're ready to do that.
Yeah, let's talk about what it means in a little more mundane astrology to have Gemini season. And I mean, overall, this is a great time to what we were just talking about. Employ that curiosity in your life. Take advantage of you've got, this kind of month chunk of time from May 20th to June 20th to really occupy the Gemini part of your chart. And that's kind of what we're gonna bring your attention to. So mhm.
There you have it. So, yeah, okay. So, you know, what we see in looking at this chart right away is the fact that most of these, there's so many planets still hanging out in Taurus, and a lot of them will move into Gemini as the month progresses. But at the start of it, at the very beginning, we've got still a lot of focus there. But we see immediately, you know, the sun moves into Gemini. And what does it do? It forms a trine aspect almost right away to Pluto. And that's going to be a big thing that we're going to talk about in the individual impacts. Why would we want to talk about that, Jenny?
Well, we really like the trine that Pluto brings because in Taurus season, we talked about the square. It was much heavier. It was much more of this challenge around where do you need to grow and, in this tangible way that Taurus represented. But now we have a trine in Gemini season. So this is giving you an opportunity to kind of play with that Pluto energy with a lighter touch, which is what we were talking about Gemini symbolizing anyway. So it really brings in a flow of intellectual energy, a flow of empowerment, the flow of this kind of uplift and air energy that we're all receiving in our chart. So we thought it'd be nice and helpful to see this different face of Pluto, this lighter touch that it can bring during this Gemini season for this little chunk of time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just thinking about Pluto and the powerful change that it's bringing in our lives, wherever it is in our personal charts. And yeah, we've been really struggling with it over the past month. And now we get to, like you said, see the other side of it, see the empowerment of Pluto, the flow that Pluto can bring. After all the effort and work we've been putting in, it feels like this is opening a door to receiving some of the growth potential.
Yeah, and it's wherever you have Gemini in your chart is a place that you're going to be communicating, the place that you're going to be working with pieces of information and working to share them and distribute them and have conversations. So that's what's being empowered. It's essentially empowering your voice, no matter where you have Gemini. So we'll talk about that more in the individual impacts. For now, as Laurie said, though, all of those planets that are in Taurus, except for Uranus, are going to move into Gemini, including Jupiter. That's a big shift. It takes about a year for Jupiter to go through a sign. So having it go into Gemini on the 25th there of May is really important. And Laurie and I have made a video about that if you want to understand more about what that shift means. But that's pretty exciting. So that means that there's going to be a Jupiter trine to Pluto, which
Yeah.
is great. That really brings in some nice energy. And it kind of brings in like, what's that idea of prominence, that idea of something bigger coming to light than just your personal stuff. It's something even bigger coming into the picture. So, oh yeah, I like your arrows.
Well, all those planets are going to be going in there. And when they go in there, they're going to be trining Pluto.
Yeah. But
So that's going to really, we're going to feel that flow through this time. It's not as though there's no challenges during the course of this season, but we really want to focus on this because it's such a powerful gift that we're all receiving in some area of our life during this period of time.
Yeah, and I think the one other thing to get from this little thing here is to see that Mars is also going to move into Taurus during this month. And that's where we will have the challenge that comes from the Mars-Pluto square. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But just so you know, that's also moving out of Aries and into Taurus. And actually, there's actually a lot of activity this whole season because there is 6 different ingresses because both Venus and Mercury are going to make it all the way through Gemini and actually reach Cancer before the season is over. So there's a lot of change ups here. There's some busy activity. There's some nice flow. And then there is some challenges in the kind of the second half of the season. So
It's one of the things that I think is really interesting that might be worth mentioning at this point is just, you know, both the start of the season, Mars in Aries, that's its home sign, one of its home signs. Venus in Taurus, one of its home signs. So both Mars and Venus are really in their happy place as the season begins. As we go deeper into it, I think it's like one day apart. They each move out of their happy place and into a place that they're not quite so happy about. So that's an interesting little shift that'll be happening as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And on that note, Mercury will, once it's in Gemini, that'll be Mercury's home place, and so Mercury is very happy there, and really adds to the uplift of this season having it move in there. So
Yeah, thinking
yeah,
about that, Mercury going into Gemini, where all it wants to do is gather that information, and having it trine Pluto, that's going to be really significant for
yeah,
conversations. If there are important conversations that you need to have, kind of really think about this as a incredibly powerful period of time to do that.
yeah. That's a great time. Mercury gets to geek out, so you can get your geek on and whatever your favorite geeky topics are.
Right.
So,
Okay.
that's all right. I think that's kind of, yeah, we covered the things. I think let's talk about, so we'll talk about the week by week, which
Yeah,
I
and
love. Thank
how
you
we've
for making.
broken this down, we don't break this down by the calendar, Sunday to Sunday or whatever. We break it down with the lunar phases. So we have it broken down right after the full moon, right after the last quarter, right after the new moon, and right after the first quarter. So
Yeah,
that's
I really like doing it that way because this is like the original calendar is the moon, and my secret agenda personally is to get people to align with what's going on in nature more, because that's what we all evolved in. So this is our natural connection, our natural heritage. So that it's my
Jenny,
full disclosure.
I'm not so sure that this is a secret agenda. I think a lot of people know this is your agenda.
Shh. Okay. Well, I like how you've broken these down, because what we want you to see from this, there's a lot of numbers up on here, and we're going to try to keep it simple. The first part of the season has,
But
this is where,
I want
what's
to
that?
interrupt you for one
Oh,
second.
okay.
I apologize for doing that. But I just, for people that are really interested, I just want you to see what this is. Every single thing that happens this month is on this list. And you can look at this and see, just look and you can read it across from left to right. As an example, the sun moves into Gemini and it tells us what time. This is all Eastern time. And then we've got the aspects, so you can see Sun trine Pluto, and it tells you exactly when. I just wanted to kind of explain that. And then this is the full moon. So you can just kind of take a screenshot of this, print it out, and you've got the whole month right in front of you to play with. So
Yeah.
back to you, Jenny. I apologize for interrupting you.
No, that's okay. I mean, I think that, this is great to have these dates and want to have these dates, but I also understand for some people, you're going to look at this and be like, oh, God, that's a horrible number of numbers and symbols I don't know, and this and that. So, it's great. And then some people will be fine with it and enjoy seeing all this. But what we want to really do is, like, Lori, I really like how you circled all the kind of positive things, because when I say positive, I mean trine aspects, so nice flow. I mean sextiles that present opportunities, and I mean positive, like conjunctions that are between planets that are well intended, we'll say. And once that's done, what you're going to see is that the first whole half of this time period is really, there's a lot of flow. There's a lot of opportunity. We have a full moon in Sagittarius, and all of these trines. This is where all the trines to Pluto are happening that we've really highlighted in our individual impacts.
Actually, incredible.
It is like, look at that. I mean, so
Incredible.
just soft view, blue circles mean areas of flow and opportunity. So there's a lot, right? I mean, just on a simple point of view here, there's a lot of stuff happening.
From
And
the
then what happens,
beginning of the
Lori?
season until the new moon, everything is just coming up roses. And then after the new moon, we see that there's a lot of squares, which really suggest challenges.
Yeah.
So it's like there's this real pivot point at that new moon. All of a sudden, it's like, so really between the beginning of the season and June, and the new moon, really take advantage of that flow. And then on the other side of that, build yourself up, build your resources, build your inner reserves while all that flow and positivity is happening, because you're going to have to really get to work after. Man, I think I scheduled my vacation not at the best time. Anyway, oh well.
Well, actually, no, I see. Oh, I see, because of where your vacation's earlier than that. But anyway, what I think is cool about this is also what I want folks to understand is that we have that full moon on May 23rd. So the full moon is the midpoint of the moon cycle, and it indicates the time, the whole second half of the moon cycle after the full moon is really a time of more inward reflection. It's really a time of more or sharing of your wisdom, like sort of these softer skills. And what I think is really cool is what you want to think about in those 2 weeks is like kind of what you already said, Lori, like kind of storing up on like gathering this energy, gathering the flow energy that's happening, gathering up the opportunities to you, being willing to kind of share the meaning of those things. And all the way through the balsamic moon, because that balsamic moon is kind of the part of the cycle where you're putting nutrients in the cycle, in the
Mhm.
soil for the next cycle. So once you hit the new moon, then you're going to start using those nutrients that are in the soil. So in other words, you have this beautiful 2 week period to just flood, the soil with all kinds of, nutrients and water and really like fluff it up, so that when you get to the new moon, you can really plant a seed with a lot of conviction behind you, a lot of mental conviction, because it's a new moon in Gemini. You can really plant that seed, and that will enable you to have a really robust seed to manage the conflicts and the challenges that are presented by those red circles on the other side of that new moon. So I really like this, really breaks the season down in kind of a simple way, doesn't it?
It really does. It's really interesting, and it's so nice to have yeah, you're filling up your cup, and then you're getting to use it. Those squares are not something to be afraid of. They're really energies that enable us to buckle down and get some work done and accomplish something. Probably, yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what direction we want to take this conversation. There's so many, individual pieces we could look at.
Mhm.
Uh,
Well, what would be helpful would just be to quickly talk about taking it from the top. What does it mean? What does the trine to Pluto mean? What does that bring in? Just in a simple way. And then what do the sextiles bring in from Neptune earlier on in the season? Would that make sense? And then move into the second half?
yeah, I think just really simply in those first few days before the full moon, we've got obviously the sun moving into Gemini, and then that beautiful flow of the sun trining Pluto, which is what that's really kind of the base of this whole beginning piece, because first the sun, and then Venus, and then Jupiter, and then Mercury all do the same thing. And it's just bringing all the effort that we put in during Taurus season into a place where we're getting the gifts of it.
Yeah, there's a flow of distributing that information now that you've had to do the harder work during the previous Taurus season. So yeah, I like that.
And then
Definitely.
here, 2 days, 3 days after the sun moves into Gemini, that sun conjunct Jupiter, that's the beginning of a cycle of really in increasing our understanding of our values, or just bringing a lot of positive energy in there right at the last degree of Taurus. It's kind of interesting how that is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got a little, on the 23rd as well, we've got the full moon, and a little sweet kind of creative spot with Venus sextile Neptune. That's kind of nice.
Mm,
That
yeah.
whole first section, what a lovely, lovely thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you have the full moon in Sagittarius. We're making a video about that. And then Venus moves into Gemini. Um, and and then Jupiter has a sextile to Neptune, and then Jupiter moves into Gemini. So this is where that crucial shift happens for those two planets. It's just all in this very short period of time, May 23rd and to 25th. And in that window, you have that Venus trining Pluto, bringing in that accent of empowerment to relationships, finances, those kinds of topics. So it just kind of carries on. And then I guess I didn't really pay attention to this in our prep, Lori, but funny how Mars conjuncts Chiron there too. Time to take action on whatever came to light way back April 8th on that solar eclipse,
On the
because
solar
right on
eclipse. Yeah.
Chiron, right? And
Yeah.
now Mars is coming in to say, all right, go ahead, take action. Take action on all the stuff you've learned since. It's time to just go ahead and act.
Yeah,
That's
because that Chiron is basically still at the same degree, just barely a little bit farther along than where it was with the eclipse. And then, yeah, and then we get to that last quarter moon,
yeah.
which, if you've signed up for Jenny's newsletter, pay attention because you'll get a newsletter about all the quarter moons, which are great. I love that you do those, Jenny, by the way.
Thank you.
The other thing that we didn't really talk about in our prep, which I think is kind of an interesting one, is we didn't really talk about this Mercury conjunct Uranus.
Details.
Details.
This is
That's like, pay attention to where you need to be waking up. I mean, what is it? It's a Mercury transit. It's not a huge big deal, but it's a statement. It's a statement.
Mm-hmm. That's like the bolt of lightning, the thing that comes out of the blue sky where you're like, what? And this kind of thought arise. I mean, Mercury is your mindset, so it is the idea of a totally innovative stroke of insight that you want to pay attention to right there at the very end of May.
Right there. And then a few days later, that Mercury takes whatever story it's picked up from Uranus and it's bringing it into Gemini, where it will enliven even more that area of life where Gemini is in your natal chart.
Yeah, and then oh gosh, and then right between those two incidences, we've got the Jupiter trine Pluto. That's a moment. I mean, the other planets, it's awesome they're trining Pluto, but Jupiter trining Pluto, that's kind of a bigger deal. That brings it more into the social sphere, the something that's pretty potent to have that. So that's an important moment to pay attention to. That time, right at the end of May, beginning of June, that's a time when you're really going to want to move something forwards. It's a great time for, I don't know, like topics, like some kind of promotional topics where you're talking about what you're doing, sharing what you're doing with other people, and there's an empowerment there. So that's a good time to think about that kind of energy.
Yeah, really paying attention. I mean, there's so much about paying attention to what insights come in. Yeah, pay attention to the stories other people bring, to the insights that arrive during these times. You really want to pay attention. And then Mercury joining with Jupiter here on the 4th as well, that brings in a lot as well. That's so interesting.
So that's a potent week between that last quarter moon and the balsamic moon. There's a lot that can get kind of rolled into all of your thought processes here. There's a lot of power and potency in there. That's an important week. So even though it's going to be that waning moon, so you're always thinking about kind of closing things down, there's a lot of just energy coming into that's telling you where you need to go. There's a lot of insight. And then also the last thing I want to mention in that week is that you have the superior conjunction of Sun to Venus. That just means that Venus is starting a whole new cycle, and it's starting in Gemini. So there is something about communication that's going to flavor that entire new Venus cycle that's going to be going on for the next I forget what it is, but year and a half or something like that. Year and a bit.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
No, somewhere like that. So it
and then we've got the new moon.
Yeah. And then we have the new moon, and then that's that kind of that demarcation of like, all right, now you're going to have to put to work everything you've just kind of put into the mix, behind you. Like it's kind of like you've drank the smoothie, and now all the nutrients in the smoothie are moving out to your body to empower you. So
you better get to work, go to the gym, get to work.
Yeah. There's a lot, and then Mars moves into Taurus, which is not really his favorite place. And that I see that as probably that's the most challenging aspect that I see in this whole season. Don't you think? Like the Mars square Pluto.
Mars square Pluto. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's the most challenging thing during this period of time. But I want to address a little bit all those squares to Saturn. Because there's, what is it, Venus, and then the sun, and then Mercury all square Saturn. And I just want to say that it really is not, I want people to not look at this like, oh my God, this is hard, hard, hard. It's a requirement to take responsibility, to really be serious about the work you're doing. If you can't do that without thinking of it as a negative, then yeah, maybe it's a negative. But it also is really supporting all these gifts that have come in, all this positive energy that has come in is now accessible to support you taking responsibility and doing something, really progressing forward, being productive in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Squares really, we're not going to get a damn thing done in our lives if we don't have square aspects to push us to, all these lovely aspects we might just want to lay out in the sun and enjoy ourselves. But now
Yeah.
we've got to get some effort underway.
Yeah, I really like Saturn brings structure, and we all need structure. You got to have some kind of schedule, some sort of structure to work off of. The other thing I always like to think about is, my sister owns a vineyard, so I like to think about the fact that grapes that make really good wine almost always come from, soils with very little nutrients. There's always a struggle for the vine to grow, and then it makes this incredible wine. That's what a really good wine is. Those vines that really have to struggle on a really steep slope, that have to work through rocks to get the nutrients, that makes the most amazing wine. So just an analogy to think about the purpose of the struggle, why things are challenging. It's worth the effort. The sweat, blood, and tears that go into things are super important, are part of what we're doing. So,
I want to just touch on one other thing that we hadn't talked about. And that is that during this week that we're thinking of as being quite challenging, also, all three of those planets are sextiling that Chiron, which is still basically at the degree of the eclipse that happened. So that's bringing more opportunity to support whatever began at that eclipse.
yeah.
I
I like that. That's like
supporting a place where you feel vulnerable, but there's the support to keep moving it forward.
yeah, this just brings back that question, which I think of as Chiron and Aries bringing it. Just check in with your motivations, check in with what's the core impetus for your action. And this is an opportunity because it's a positive, it's a sextile. So it really helps you see. It's like soothing to kind of check in, like, oh, what am I motivated by? And this is another layer of healing that's available that kind of gives meaning to the struggle that the squares bring in.
But like you said, that one is the most challenging. What do you want to say about that?
Well, that certainly it brings in somewhat of an explosive type of energy, especially with Mars. I think of Mars in Taurus as being kind of like, it's a little bit like stuck. It's a little bit, I hate to say it, but the word that comes to mind is constipated. It's a little bit like Mars wants to really move forwards, and Taurus is like, hey man, you just need to slow down, and then it comes into this Pluto square, and it's like, and it gives meaning. It says you need to slow down because you need to understand the transformative potential of the process that you're in, and that doesn't come with speed. That comes with working through the struggle and the challenge, and that's kind of the message. And then it's like a laxative effect after.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sorry to bring in a gross example, but it's kind of instructive, so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's the first quarter square of Mars to Pluto. So there is, just a feeling in it of the frustration is for the purpose of moving forward, not of breaking down.
Yeah.
This is a forward moving square, it's not time to break something down, begin the ending. This is a time to move forward. So I think that's an important piece as well.
Yeah, it's like the crisis point where you have to take an action. So
Right,
you do it, and that's how you get where you get,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah.
And if you really, if you know your chart and are working with these things, just look at those two houses. Again, where's Aquarius? Where's Taurus? Where is there a conflict that you have to take some action on to move forward? And that's the most challenging piece during this Gemini season.
Yeah. Um,
And then we come to that first quarter moon.
Yeah, so then, exactly, and that echo of first quarter moon, time for action. And it's in Virgo. So it's time for practical action at that first quarter moon. And the same day we have Mercury and the Sun conjunction. That's the new cycle for Mercury. That is in astrology, that's the superior conjunction, while Mercury's in direct motion. So that's the beginning of a whole new cycle. And it's in Gemini. So you're planting a seed of information here. There's a very important dialogue or information that needs to happen. Which reminds me, we didn't talk about how Gemini, there's a piece you got to listen to. So there's also listening that's involved in whatever this new dialogue. And then you have, just interesting, you got those squares to Neptune. Like, what's that all about, Lori?
Well, let's see. I would say that you can, it's a square. So there's some way in which there's a challenge that is pushing on us to make a decision or do something different. It's Neptune, so it's going to bring in imagination. Maybe you need to just kind of depend on your intuition for making decisions at this time, or bring in imagination. There's something along those lines. There's also, you can always think with Neptune, something's not quite the way you think it is. Some way in which you're not seeing things clearly. I would say with Venus, Mercury, and the Sun making square aspects to Neptune during this last little chunk of time, it's not a time to make big decisions. You want to wait until your information is more solid and clear,
Yeah,
because
or if you
things
are
are not
making,
as they appear to be.
yeah, and but if you are making decisions, it might be that these are more like slow gut level decisions because it is a first quarter moon, so there is stuff that you're trying to move forwards towards on that level. But not concrete. I'm making concrete, rigid, very practical decisions that and then expecting the results to
Right.
be that way. That's not gonna be helpful. But if it's more like I don't know, spiritual practice decisions or, I don't know, things that are more imaginative or creative decisions, because you're going to find yourself pressed into having to make them. And you don't always, right? Like, that's kind of what I think too. Is like, it's great when you have clarity and you make the decision, but a lot of times you don't. And you just kind of have to keep moving the thing forward. So it might be not that you're making big life-changing decisions, but you make the decision that takes the next step into the fog, right? Like,
Yeah, and
yeah,
it is going to
that's
be, one of the interesting things when we look at those squares is they're at 2952
right.
of mutable signs.
Yeah.
These squares are happening at a really unstable spot. The point itself is quite unstable. So, yeah.
And visible, right? Because it's at the Aries point.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
right. Like it's a little like, oh, what the other thing that occurred
Yeah.
to me,
It's
Lori, and to those of you listening, was like whenever all the planets come into Gemini, they have this trine to Pluto. And then to exit, they have to square Neptune.
yeah.
So this is like the kind of the entry point of the trine to Pluto, and then the exit point of but things might not be clear, or geez, you need to think about, collective needs here. This isn't just all about one individual. This is about everybody on the planet and everything on the planet, every being, every rock, every tree. I mean, that really brings in those big
Yeah.
picture things that you're not going to get off the hook here with just thinking about your own selfish needs. Like you're going to have to consider the bigger picture of your own actions, but also how you fit in that, and like allowing that to be a motivating factor in what you are taking action on, the decisions you are making.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and in those last few days, we've got Venus, Mercury, and the Sun going into Cancer. And
Yeah.
again, just on that Aries point, there's a very public awareness here occurring.
Yeah.
So then we're coming into Cancer season and we'll have a whole new conversation from there.
Mm-hmm. And the summer
Wow.
solstice. So, okay.
Awesome. I want to take a screenshot myself. Oh, it's not going to let me. For some reason, I want to take a screenshot of that with the color
I
coding.
think I can do it. I'm doing it.
Oh, good. Do it and send it to me
Yeah.
because I
All
can.
right. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let me actually give me a moment here to clear all that out. And um, I have to. Recording. Okay, we are back and let's get back here and on to the individual pieces. We're going to start talking about people with Aries rising.
That's right. Okay, so those of you with Aries rising, let's just start with the simple fact here that you have Gemini in the third house. So that means that Gemini season is unfolding in your third house. Um, let's see, Gemini is all about communicating, this whole gathering of information that we've already talked about at length. And those of you with Aries rising, well, the third house is your house of communication. So this is an important time for you to be talking about your life, for you to be talking about the things you need to share. There's a big focus here on you being willing to use your voice to express your curiosity, to engage in conversations with other people, really just to talk about everything that you've learned probably since Taurus season. There's been some challenges there. Um, Now, for the purposes of uh, these individual impacts, we'll call them, we also have included Pluto here. Pluto has been in your 11th house for a while now. Laurie and I have made many videos about Pluto. It seems to have been included in many, and here's another one. But anyway, so this big change that has to do with your community, there's a slow, long transformation that has been initiated in the way you relate with groups and the way that you receive love. So Lori, what do you think these two things mean together? How do these two areas of life work together?
Oh, there's just a beautiful flow. I think, during Taurus season, the the sort of the more difficult side of this transformation was probably very evident to you. There was some way in which there was a struggle adapting to these big changes happening in your community. And whatever you processed and struggled through during Taurus season, it sort of feels like as Gemini season starts, you begin really receiving the gifts. It's sort of like the empowerment that you are receiving from your community is encouraging you to be curious about how you speak, how you communicate, what you can bring to the table with your voice.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I know. So let's see. You could think about this as maybe you're part of a new community. Maybe something new's come to light, and suddenly you find yourself much more able to say what you need because you're with a new community that it feels empowering to you. That would be one thing that you just feel more able to voice whatever your concerns are in that group. Another way to think about it would be that something that you've learned in that community has shown you how to communicate better with people in general in your life, in other parts of your life. So there's a really nice interplay between these two areas. And I really like this idea that you're getting to see this more helpful face of Pluto, where you really are empowered to use your voice in this new way. Um, I
And
guess yeah, well, do you want to add some things to
well,
that?
I was just thinking about, the third house also as relating to our siblings, our neighbors, our neighborhood, and neighborhood and community go hand in hand here. And there can really be some sort of a storyline with you around your community and how it supports your relationship to your neighborhood, your neighbors, etc. So there could be something involved there as well.
Yeah, and that's funny because there's certainly overlap, right? I mean, you could belong to an association that's a neighborhood association, and those people are by all means your community members. So that's what's cool about these houses in general is there's some overlap here. These aren't totally distinct areas, and so you can think about this like in the terms of like this is a great time to start a neighborhood initiative. Like if you want to see some change like this, you want to figure out how to support people who are struggling that are your neighbors or those kinds of things would be something to think about.
And if you think about the struggle during Taurus season, maybe there was some way that you saw a lack in the community, or there was some way that you felt lacking in your connection to community. And now, as these planets start going into Gemini, there being an opening for you to find a way to be included or
Mhm.
feel included.
Yeah, and all those same topics could apply to relatives, siblings, cousins, other relatives. So think about what suits you in these scenarios so that you understand how to take advantage of this Gemini season. That's the main point for those of you with Aries risings. Just figure out how this makes sense to you, and then
Yeah.
apply it.
Enjoy that flow. Enjoy the fact that during this season, you can really start to gain the benefits of the transformation that's happening in your community. Bottom line, you're
Nice.
starting to really see the benefits of the efforts that you've put in. Okay, let's make that change and go on to folks who have, oops, let's see, folks who have Taurus rising. So for those of you with Taurus rising, Gemini season is highlighting your second house. You can think of the second house as it's the house that relates to your money, your resources, how you think about those things, how you work with those things. It's also underneath all of that, it's about your self-worth, how you value yourself. And, you know, if you've ever had no resources, no money, the connection between self-worth and money and resources. So this is where there's a lot of focus, a lot of light being shown in that area of your life. And we have included Pluto here to give us something to really think about in terms of what is the great value of Gemini season for us. And for you, the trine aspect coming from Pluto in your 10th house to the sun in your second is really allowing you to see the the positive impact of the profound change that's been bubbling up in your career or social reputation. And this is really opening your awareness of the benefit, whether that comes through money or just feeling better about yourself in the face of that transformation. It could come either way. What do you think of this, Jenny?
I really like these two areas of life because the second and the 10th really refer to some way that you're meeting your material needs or your livelihood. So it's really, I think it's just a really awesome time to reflect on what changes have happened in your public or professional life and notice the impact on the way you value yourself. I mean, that's really what's at stake here, and you're getting to see this in a really new way. We just had a pretty challenging Taurus season. And so those of you with Taurus rising, there's been probably some tumultuousness, some really shifting and moving in the way that you see yourself. And now you're going to get to see how that affects your self-worth. You've come out the other side of some struggles. And so now you kind of get to bask a little bit in the gifts of the empowerment that is now coming. And, Pluto is being up there in your 10th house, so it was putting pressure, or is, in during Taurus seasons, it has put pressure on your sense of self. And now it's just opening up the gate to enjoy all that hard work that you've done, and to just, it's going to naturally flow into a new way of valuing yourself, a new way of valuing your intellect, your ability to communicate with other people, and that's just going to come through in your professional life one way or another. That's so, yeah, it's a good one. I like it.
And it could also benefit your bank account.
That's right. Yeah, really could be a big old shift going on there. So.
So let's move on to folks who have Gemini rising.
Okay, so those of you with Gemini rising, well, let's just start with the fact that as a Gemini rising person, that puts Gemini in a very prominent place for you. It's part of your identity to be this curious person who's interested in sharing information. I mean, maybe you're a storyteller or a teacher, or you're a person who really likes to network. Maybe you're even a journalist. I mean, those are all ways to use that Gemini energy. But at any rate, you're a person who values communication. So this Gemini season really kind of highlights that, and highlights your lovely curiosity and your ability to communicate with people, your ability to intellectualize about all kinds of topics. It really kind of jazzes up that area of life. So it's, I mean, every year, those of you with Gemini rising at this time, you probably feel this kind of zhuzh of energy coming in, this kind of whoosh, this uplift. And right now, at this particular Gemini season, it's likely you're really feeling that, because you're really getting the trine from Pluto in the mix here, and that really is adding this other layer of this philosophy or life philosophy that you have, that is becoming more and more part of your essential self. And it's very empowering. It's definitely a change. There's a change ever since Pluto moved into that house, but that's what's showing up here. So yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about this. You want to really consider, if you've got Gemini rising, you really want to consider the struggle that Taurus season was, some internal struggle around the powerful changes happening in terms of your worldview, your basic world outlook has been through such a powerful shift. And during Taurus season, you may have been struggling against that. And as Gemini season begins and gets underway, this flow, it's like the effort that you did to go kind of inward and struggle with your own internal processes is now paying off with this beautiful flowing ability to bring that powerful shifting dynamics of your worldview into who you are, being able to express yourself from this new perspective. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, and bearing in mind our conversation of the earlier, that the whole first half of the season really has this flow to it. That's really lovely. And then there's a bit more challenge in the second half of the season. And I'm only adding this in because what I want you to get from this is you have this empowerment. And then in the second half of the season, you're going to be creating more of a container for that information. You're going to be creating more of a structure, and you're going to be accountable to how you use your voice. And I mean, even though those are challenging things, it's also really awesome, because you can't evolve without that structure as well. So that's just part of this whole season, and part of the way you can use it for your empowerment.
I'm really glad you brought that up. I tend to assume people listen to the first part of our video, and I hope you did if you're listening to this. And it's really worth listening to the first part before we go into the individual impacts, because we cover so much more. But can you imagine like a particular way that this would play out for somebody? Just
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting for Gemini rising because it's so much about your expression, the way you express yourself. I just think this is just you start moving around in the world with more energy and more trust and faith in your critical thinking skills and your ability to share your philosophy in a positive way that's empowering for other people. So it's hard to think of, for me, it's hard to think of specific examples because this can happen in your workplace. This can happen in your, all of your personal relationships because you're just walking around carrying this with you. So it really depends on, think about yourself as a Gemini rising person, what's going on in your life and how can this be applied to really kind of help you express yourself, your fundamental self, in all the things that you do. So,
Yeah, what's
yeah.
the powerful shift in your worldview? Where's it coming from? Has
Yeah.
that powerful shift of your worldview come through study, education, travel, some new understanding that you're having? Whatever that new understanding you're having, I feel like this trine aspect is really incorporating it in your personality. And now you can express it. It's like this big change. I love that. That's beautiful to think about. Okay, let's go on to folks who actually, let's do this first so that we can. All right, so if you have Cancer rising, this is putting the focus of Gemini season into your 12th house. So you've got Gemini in your 12th house. This just suggests to me that people with Cancer rising have a lot of curiosity, a lot of interest, and a lot of active intellect around their own internal psychological processes, their own internal understanding of their spirituality. Those areas of life are intellectually really integrated and active in these people with Cancer rising.
Mm.
So first, think about that. What is going on in that area? There's, as the Gemini season begins, your attention goes more onto that area of your life. And with the trine aspect to Pluto, oh, thank you. We've got that trine aspect to Pluto really offering a perspective on the powerful changes that have been going on for you with Pluto's entrance into your 8th house. There are ways in which you've been really learning new navigation skills in close partnerships, new ways of setting boundaries. And that work that you've been doing there, which has probably caused a lot of struggle for you over, through Taurus season. There's probably been a lot of struggles of trying to, kind of get your bearings of how you're setting boundaries, how you're navigating this stuff. But now, during Gemini season, as the planets come into Gemini and trine that Pluto, you're receiving the gifts and the gifts of. So what you're receiving are the gifts of these new ways of navigating other people's stuff. And it's gifting you in your own internal understanding of your psychological or spiritual behind the scenes patterns. I probably
Mm-hmm.
threw a lot of words out there that may have confused people. And Jennie, you might be acquainted with how this plays out.
Yes, as a Cancer rising person, indeed. Well, I think what I want to say here is just to, think simply in terms of what the 8th and the 12th house have in common. And what they have in common is that they both have to do with your kind of deeper, more instinctive self. Like it's more of the emotional layers. And it's fascinating, really, to be a water rising person, a Cancer rising person with all the sensitivity and emotional stuff of Cancer, and yet to have this like very intellectual way of looking at these kind of instinctive, intuitive spaces. So in other words, like the 12th house, it's like you really, with Gemini there, you can be very curious about these deep processes. You can be curious about the collective and your role in it, on an intellectual level, just kind of playing with concepts in a way, with a pretty light touch. But having Pluto going through your 8th house is no joke. I mean, there is a seriousness about having to get clear about your boundaries, and that really is the key to your transformation. But in this situation, with it being a trine, and kind of like, I see it as like a gate coming open of your mind where you're like, oh, I can just explore these topics. I can just really go in and understand. I mean, maybe you're in therapy, for example, and you just feel kind of like it's empowering. It's not something to be embarrassed about or something that's, oh, there's something wrong. It's like, no, you're going in there with curiosity. And as you understand how your stuff works, it gives you the ability to start understanding how other people's stuff works. And that helps you know how to set boundaries in a way that works, like not in an abrupt, kind of rude kind of way, but in a simple way that allows you to say, nope, I need this for my empowerment, and you're learning the skill of how to do that. So that's kind of what I think about these two areas. And this Gemini season is really giving this opportunity to dance around with those concepts and see how that plays, for you, and look at how boundaries and your own subconscious patterns interact with each other and how they help each other out in a lot of ways.
And
So,
all that you're learning about how to set those boundaries, about how to navigate other people's deep places, how that is now being offered as a gift. I
yeah.
love this. I love this trine. And, we have mentioned that if you didn't watch the beginning of the video before we got into the individual impacts, I'd encourage you to do so, because we talk a lot about how, the breakdown of the whole period of time between May 20th and June 20th. And it's really the first few weeks that you really get all of these gifts. After that, there's a little more work to do, but enjoy the gifts and watch the first part of the video.
Yeah, you get to put those gifts into play. So, all right, cool.
Okay, so we're going to move on to folks who have Leo rising.
Okay. So those of you who have Leo rising, yeah, I like this one. This is a very social one. Let's just throw that out there first. Very social. You're a Leo rising person. So whether or not you feel like that's congruent because Leo's super flamboyant or not, it doesn't matter. You still have it as a rising sign. And this still indicates a time of a lot of conversation, a lot of interacting, a lot of kind of networking and moving and shaking happening in your world in a positive way. And that's because the Gemini season, the sun itself and all the other planets that move into Gemini is landing in your very social 11th house of community. So community is, your place of like-minded cohorts, your place where you really feel supported and uplifted. In this case, for your ideas, from a community that shares your ideas, that you can really get into some great conversations and things that really stimulate your mentality and really lift you up. So that's where this Gemini season's happening. Great time for promotion, like networking, those kinds of things are going to be important for you, depending what you're trying to promote. Could be a business or it could be more of just some social ideas. In the meantime, what also adds more emphasis to this very social time is that, you have Pluto now in your seventh house. It's going to be there for a long time. It represents a big change in the way you handle your partnerships. And we've made lots of videos about this. So do please check out our Pluto going into Aquarius videos, and some of the others are going to highlight this. But there's a big change in the way you're doing partnerships. And so in this case, during Gemini season, it's a lot of empowerment coming from that. There's something new and exciting. And there's a gift that is coming about through the interplay of these two places of partnerships and community. So yeah, I don't know. What do you have to add to that, Laurie?
Well, I think it's important to think about, over this recent period of time. And yeah, this is really important because Pluto is that seventh house. Pluto going into that house has profoundly shifted the dynamics in your personal relationships in some way. And that could be, you could be looking at that as having been a really difficult, probably through Taurus season, there was a lot of difficulty around navigating that, kind of getting your bearings of what has changed, what is in the process of changing in your most significant partnerships. The sun moving into this position of being in a trine and all the other planets as they gather there doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden everything is delightful in your relationship, but there's the change in relationship is opening up the door to community.
Mm.
However that is, and what you want to focus on here is, where is community, support from community opening up, that is supporting you as you navigate these very powerful changes in your relationships.
Mm. Yeah. And you know, it's interesting too. I was just going to throw in the thing there, like you got to think about during Taurus season, so just the time before this, from sort of April 19th and May 20th, there was more challenge and pressure coming from this area because Pluto was squaring all the Taurus planets. So there was more pressure feeling coming to, to do with your profession, your career, that maybe wasn't quite as pleasant. And now you have a chance to talk about that more, talk about it with your cohorts, talk through maybe some of those challenges that you're experiencing in your profession. So I mean, these are, your lives, so it's not like the challenges just go away. It's just that the challenge is there, but then this opens up the door for a new way of handling the challenge by leaning into your community and getting their feedback and seeing how their lives are going, and it kind of brings in that flavor to it, which kind of lightens everything and helps you see that you're not alone. And maybe you can get some resources for how to handle whatever your business challenges are, or whatever's going on in your professional 10th house life where Taurus is taking place, Taurus season.
Yeah, and I just want to
Yeah.
add that it might not be your career at all. It might just be your social reputation in some way. I'm thinking about a specific person that has this Leo rising that this just plays out so perfectly for. And these are older people, and it's not about career, but it's definitely the struggle through Taurus season. So much on social reputation coming from this big change in relationship. And now just I see this opening into a community that can support that change. And so you got to really look at what your own situation is and make these things, understand how these things fit with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to folks with Virgo rising. So if you've got Virgo rising, this active Gemini curious season is really lighting up your 10th house. And again, that 10th house is going to have something to do with your career, your vocation, or your social reputation, whatever that is. So you want to think about that. That's where all the heat and warmth of the season is career. And at the same time, you want to, we've included Pluto here because Pluto is being trined by each of the planets as they enter Gemini. And that really is, what you want to look at is what has been the profound, powerful change that is occurring, has been bubbling up and is going on around your day-to-day routines, whether that's your healthcare or your work life, whatever it is, those day-to-day routines, there's profound changes underway there. And probably through Taurus season, it was probably a lot of struggle around how to manage the technology of the changes, given that Pluto's in Aquarius there. So there may have been a lot of challenge there. And now as Gemini season gets underway, the gifts of the work come forward.
Mm.
What do you think of this?
Well, I think, it's interesting to, or an important takeaway, I should say, is to understand the dynamic between the sixth and the 10th house. And they're in a supportive role of one another. The sixth house is your routines and all the things that you lay, like the foundation down, the structure that you have in order to be able to do whatever your work is that shows up in the 10th house. I mean, in a nutshell, they're both about work, one way or another. And I just think that, this is how they support each other. And for those of you with Virgo rising, you have air signs to do with your work. So hopefully you're communicating as part of your work. That's going to be something that's ultimately would feel pretty satisfying. And at this period in time during Gemini season, you're really going to feel the connection between those two things. Like what you do with your routines to take care of your health, to, commit to different things in how you want to look after yourself. is going to work really well with whatever you're doing for work. And as you say, like the 10th house is not just your profession, it's also just how you show up in public. So your public reputation is part of that too. So it doesn't, don't get hung up on whether or not you have a profession. That's not really the question. It's really how you show up in public. And then what is the connection between these two areas? How does your lifestyle support your work and vice versa? And this is a great opportunity to explore that and be curious about it and be willing to make some shifts up there in the 10th house if you want to. So
Yeah. And if you've been if you've been really learning new technology, that's going to be a real supportive thing for your career too. You want to think about that. I think about that at any
yeah.
rate.
Yeah.
So I think that wraps us up on that one. And let's go on to folks who have Libra rising.
Okay, so those of you with Libra rising, this is interesting because you have an air sign rising, and this whole business between Gemini season and Laurie and I have included Pluto in these charts too. It's making a grand trine between those three areas of life. So what you really want to think about here is the fact that you have an air sign rising. So you're already a person who's oriented towards some kind of communication or intellectualizing in some way, or just talking with people about what's going on. This is a pretty social, an outward social setup that's going on. So during this Gemini season, you are having your Gemini house really lit up, which is your ninth house of your worldview and the way you think critically about things. This is a really, I like Gemini up there in that ninth house. It really brings in the curiosity of how does the world work and what do I think about it? And it brings in the ability to change your mind and your opinion about things, which is so important in the ninth house to take in information, to listen to other people during this Gemini season and let that kind of change your worldview subtly, like see what comes to light. And then, so that's the ninth house. And then Pluto is just moving into your fifth house of creativity. It's already been there for a while, over a year at this point. But there's a big change in the way you view yourself as a creative person. This is a time to really dig into that and be curious about what kinds of creative things that you like to do. So these work really, really nicely together. It's kind of like how you express your creativity and then your philosophy about the way the world works are flowing really nicely. You're ready to talk about it with people. Those are all some of the things that I think about.
Hey, it's interesting because during Taurus season, there was a real struggle with the powerful changes happening in that fifth house. And Pluto going into that fifth house, the profound change that's, the undercurrent, the profound undercurrent of change in your life. Like Jenny said, it's got to do with creativity. It may also have to do with your relationships with your children, with children in general. There's other things involved here. So there's a profound change, regardless, around how you give of yourself. The fifth house, bottom line to me, is how you give of yourself most authentically. And there's a big, powerful shift underway there. And during Taurus season, you probably struggled with that shift. You struggled to set boundaries with other people. There was just a lot of challenge in managing that change. And now, as we are here at Gemini season, the floodgates open. There's an opportunity to see how the hard work and the effort and the struggle now is bringing a gift. It's like that shift of how you give of yourself is opening your understanding on a way bigger level of your place in the world, who you are, your place in the world, and your bigger picture understanding of the world you live in.
Yeah, and I think overall, as a Libra rising person, this is a moment of upliftment.
Yeah.
This is a moment of enjoy the socializing that as you like to enjoy it, to feel yourself lifted and carried forwards. A little, I just think about, a breeze coming in, a soft breeze, and kind of lifting you up, and it can be really helpful because that's a pretty Taurus season was probably pretty heavy for those of you at Libra risings. In your eighth house, it's like, oh, you're just trying to work through something, and now you just kind of get to go, oh my God, that part's over. I mean, not that everything's all forever roses and wonderful, but just really there's a nice flow of energy here for you to enjoy, and just enjoy it. I think just really just enjoy this moment.
Yeah, and that flow is really most profound in the first 2 weeks of this Gemini season. If you didn't listen to the beginning part of the video before we got into the individual impacts, you do well to do so, because that kind of goes through the whole thing more fully. So, with all of that
Okay.
being said, let's move on to folks who have Scorpio rising. If you've got Scorpio rising, this Gemini season is really putting its focus in your eighth house. And the eighth house, it's an interesting house. It's really, sort of one of the deeper, more intense houses in the chart, as is the fourth, where Pluto is, but we'll get to that. Thinking about the eighth house, the way I think about the eighth house is it's really it really is where we encounter other people's deep issues and how we manage them, how we navigate ourselves in the face of people who are close to us who bring their baggage and lay it at our feet. Whatever. The eighth house is really, with the focus being there, you're going to want to be paying attention to boundaries, how you navigate deep issues with others. We've included on here Pluto in the chart. Oh, thank you, Jenny. I keep forgetting. Okay. Sorry, I'm distracted. So the focus is in that area of other people's baggage, but the flow is coming. The real gift of this Gemini season is particularly in the first 2 weeks of this season, as the quicker moving planets, along with the sun, go into Gemini, they each are trining this Pluto, which is really giving a powerful positive flow of energy from the area of home and family, where you have been and are undergoing profound change. So you want to think about the profound change at the core of who you are. It may be, in some way, it's about home, family, ancestral line, maybe the land you live on, the house you live in. Something in that area is undergoing a huge transformative change. During Taurus season, there was probably a lot of struggle involved in managing that change, in trying to figure out how to work with that change. There may have been difficulties with a partner around that. But now, as Gemini season begins, it sort of feels like the effort and the slog of those difficulties kind of opens up a floodgate of positivity, and you now can understand the boundaries that need to be set with these family members. You understand and can take some action. There's just a flow and an ease that comes during specifically the first few weeks of this Gemini season.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny looking at this one. I think it's really interesting to be a Scorpio rising person, because Scorpio rising is going to imply that there's intensity, sort of a need to be significant and right is going to be kind of ruling the whole chart here with Scorpio rising. I mean, there's something intense and deep there. But yet you've got these air signs in the eighth and the fourth house. I mean, these are the two of the most private houses in the whole situation here. These are the houses where you're really working with your deep emotional nature. You're working with things like secrets, and the deeper work around setting boundaries with other people and their baggage and so on. And so this is a very empowering moment. There's a lot of power here for you as a Scorpio rising person anyway. to be able to work in these very private and intense realms with ease, with the light touch of air signs, especially that Gemini in the eighth house. And now this is really being lit up. This is showing you how empowering that is, that your ability, your capacity to do this deep work, but with this lighter and more kind of intellectual touch, it's very helpful. It's very useful. You know, it's a moment of levity for those of you with Scorpio rising who may be used to kind of being in the heavier spaces. This is a lift. This is a way to kind of show your skill at navigating these more private and kind of difficult areas. Because even that fourth house, I mean, of course, the house where family is going to be some complication and difficulty, that part of all of our lives, you know, to how the house describes that. So anyway, I think this is a nice time to really enjoy the empowerment that's available through this. Your ability to have conversations about hard things, to bring to light these issues that aren't always the easiest to talk about.
Isn't it? It is so interesting to think about people with Scorpio rising, all that intensity in the personality, and yet the ability to be quite objective around the family, where most other people are all, intense.
That's true.
I think that's a real gift for Scorpio rising people, that kind of
Yeah.
ability to detach in a way.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. So enjoy that, Scorpio rising folks. So yeah, enjoy the
okay,
season.
so now let's move on to folks who have Sagittarius rising.
Okay, so Sagittarius rising, so that's a fire sign rising here. That means that this Gemini season is taking place in your seventh house. The seventh house, in simple terms, is the place of the other. You know, the first house is the house of self. So the seventh is everyone else, essentially, everyone who's outside of you, in a lot of ways. So you have Gemini here, and that means that this Gemini season is somehow illuminating your partnership. Again, this can be your partnership at home, your spouse, but it also can be a business partner. It can be any one-on-one connection where you're having those kind of one-on-one dialogues. And for sure, here, those of you with Gemini here, dialogue is going to be really important. One of the things you might want to think about just to help is you've got a lot to say, but you also need to listen as well. So there's a balance between the listening and the saying, and that's what the real gathering of information that Gemini brings, the taking and then the delivering somewhere else. So that's what's being brought to light during this Gemini season. In a lot of ways, it's bringing the levity of your relationships, the fun part, the chatty part of your relationships is really showing up. And I'm partly saying that because we have included this trine to Pluto on these charts. And what this is bringing in is it's really infusing this Gemini season with this empowerment. It's bringing a heavier duty or kind of more important lift, in a sense, to what you want to say here in your partnerships. So I mean, I really like it. I mean, Pluto is asking you to change the way you communicate, and now you get to really test that out in your partnerships during this Gemini season, and testing it out in a way that there's a nice flow here. This is a beautiful thing, a helpful thing, that as I'm seeing it.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
I like this. It's interesting to think about Pluto, rather newly for Pluto because it moves so slow, being in your third house, and the profound change happening in how you communicate. It could also have something to do with siblings, neighbors, neighborhood. There's some profound shift happening in that area of your life. And you can think that during Taurus season, there was some way that you may have been really struggling against that. But now, with the sun and then the other quicker moving planets moving into Gemini, really bringing the gifts of the change in your communication style or the change in your relationships with siblings or neighbors, really bringing this positivity to how you interact one-on-one with people. Um, Maybe you fell in love with a neighbor, or maybe you're about to.
Well, I was thinking that it's possible too during the whole Taurus season when Pluto was squaring the Taurus planets and bringing more difficulty. It's almost like there was a challenge around your routines, or you might have had, some impacts on your health that you were noticing during that season. And now you really get to talk about that in a different way in your partnerships.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that that's just what came to my mind is that could be where some challenges were. And it's not that those challenges have gone away. It's more that now you have a new way to talk about it that feels more empowering and helpful instead of kind of heavy,
Yeah,
so
it's sort of like the work you did on it while it was a big struggle is now offering the gift of the work that you did on it, right?
yeah.
And the first few weeks of Gemini season are going to be the most, uplifting in this manner. And if you didn't listen to the first part of the video before we got into the individual impacts, please go back and do that because that will give you a lot more information as well.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cool. Okay.
so let's move on to those of you with Capricorn rising. So if you have Capricorn rising, the Gemini season is putting its focus in your sixth house. The sixth house is funny because people kind of underestimate its value. Like, sixth house, day to day routines, it doesn't mean much. But if you think about the profound impact on our lives of our day-to-day routines, it's so much more important than we give it credit for. I think of the sixth house really, it's our lifestyle. It's all the things that create our lifestyle. If you ever wondered what lifestyle means, you just think about it's how you eat, how you exercise, how you manage yourself day to day routines that are involved in taking care of yourself, taking care of your business or your job. So it's all of those things. So that's where the light is really shining here during Gemini season. That's where the focus is. Now, what we have included here during Gemini season, we've included Pluto. Thank you. We've included Pluto because as each of the quick moving planets move into Gemini, they are forming a trine aspect to Pluto. Now, Pluto has relatively recently moved into Aquarius. We are still really just getting ourselves accommodated, accustomed to the profound shift that is underway in wherever we have Aquarius. So for those of you with Capricorn rising, there is a profound shift underway in the area that really relates to how you value yourself, your own self-worth. It also can be related to money, resources, how you make money, how you spend money, how you think about money, all of those things, bottom line, your self-worth. So with that profound change and this trine aspect to the planets as they go into Gemini, there's a real sense that your valuing of yourself is offering a gift to the changes. It's really supporting the changes that you're making in your lifestyle.
Hmm. Yeah, it's the importance of that can't be lost. It's like just valuing yourself enough to do the self-care you need to do. And then what a gift it is between those two things. Like they really work hand in hand. Because you're not going to take care of yourself if you don't value yourself, and the process of taking care of yourself, you learn how to value yourself on a different level. So they really work hand in hand. I think what also comes to mind for me here too is those of you with Capricorn rising that you just, that your intellect is part of the way that you value yourself and is part of the way that you do your work, like the sixth house being the routines. And I always think of the how you get yourself to work, the like, are you getting enough sleep? The are you packing a lunch to bring to work? Or where do you get your food in the middle of the day? I mean, all of those questions kind of come into play there. And you have this, very intellectual, curious sign in that routine. So that means that you can be really changeable in how
Mhm.
you do your routines. And I guess one question would be, wanting to make sure you're not being too changeable. You want to have an anchor here as well. So that's a question. But during this Gemini season, you're really feeling the empowerment between these two areas. They really dovetail nicely together. Pluto here, we're looking at the flow aspect. Recently it was squaring everything. It was in Taurus. So during Taurus season, the period of time before what we're talking about here, there may be more challenge around your values and how you maybe saw yourself as a creative person, or some kind of about the way you express yourself. And now you kind of get to step out of that frustration or whatever it was, and enjoy it in a new way. I mean, and be able to talk about whatever you went through. Or maybe you're employing that more creative sense of self into your daily routines and just making it more interesting and more fun, and employing that curiosity there. So anyway, that's what some of this is about. You have to think about, for you, what does your life like? What's going on in your life, and how does this resonate with that part of your life? So
Yeah. All kinds of possibilities come to mind, but yeah, it's such an individual thing. What was the struggle around how you give of yourself during Taurus season that is now the effort you put into that is now opening this flow of really being able to develop your routines in a way that's really supportive. Yeah, powerful time.
yeah. The
So
other thing I was just thinking though is it could be like challenge around children, and then now having to figure out how that fits into your
yeah,
life.
it's funny. I thought of that too. It's like, oh, there
Yeah.
was these awful challenges around children, but now I've figured out how to include those children in the routines. Maybe I found a parents group to meet with
Yeah.
once a week, or different ideas like that come to mind.
Yeah.
Maybe the profound change in the second house is all of a sudden you were making money and where you hadn't been, and all of a sudden your children were tapping you for a loan, and now whatever. So many
Yeah.
silly ideas come to mind, but we all have our stories, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So now let's move on to folks who have Aquarius rising.
Okay, so
Ah,
those of you with Aquarius rising, you have, I mean, you are an air sign as a rising, your rising sign is air. And so this Gemini season, which is also an air sign, is happening in your fifth house. Um, I always think about the fifth house as being somewhat of an extension of your identity, because it's a way that you're expressing yourself, you're expressing your creativity. And it's in a creative extension of your sense of self. So to have Gemini here in the fifth house and during Gemini season, there's just a lot of activity here. This is a great time to really just dig into your creative processes, or dig into the way that you play with ideas. Let yourself have fun with it. Again, the fifth house can always mean children too, and it either means actual children or the playful behavior associated with a childlike mentality, in a positive way. So enjoy that. Like, really, during Gemini season, just like every year, Gemini season lights up this really creative and fun part of you. So enjoy that, and go ahead and be social, take a risk, talk to somebody new. Those are all things that are going to come about during this Gemini season. And in the meantime, we have included Pluto in these charts. And we've done that because there's this beautiful trine that we talked about in length at the beginning of this video. And it really brings in this empowerment. So for you with Aquarius rising, there's an enormous empowerment available, self-empowerment, through the way you express yourself, through these creative pursuits, through the way that you are willing to play and be generous with others. I really like this one. This is really nice. This is something you're just going to carry around with you throughout all of the aspects of your life during this Gemini season.
yeah, it's really lovely. Pluto moving into your first house, there's such a profound change of how you show up in the world, and how you understand yourself as a person. There's such a profound change, and there may have been a lot of struggle during Taurus season with the planets squaring Pluto during that time. And whatever you went through during Taurus season that was difficult, that somehow involved, this changing self and how it interacted with family and home, some struggle there. But now, as those quicker moving planets, including the sun, move into the fifth house, it's like that struggle releases itself and is available for you to use in some sort of a creative manner.
Hmm.
It's really
Yeah,
lovely.
this is almost like, you moved during Taurus season and now you can relax. You're on the other side of it. And now it's time to just take a break and go and have some fun. And that you can get back to some of the organizing of your space a little later, but just to enjoy that and go, oh, I can finally take a breath and, try something different. And
Or
yeah, that's real lightening, I think.
Yeah, or somehow your backyard had to be all dug up because of some problem, in your sewer system. And now finally you can, make your yard beautiful and invite friends. Some big change there. At any rate, there you have it. And let's move on to folks who have Pisces rising. So if you have Pisces rising, you have Gemini in your fourth house. So this is the area of life where your attention is being brought here during Gemini season, the area of home, family, ancestry, the land you live on. This is the area that's really being lit up. So pay attention, what's going on in your home, and looking at this, it's really interesting. We've included Pluto because Pluto, in the beginning, especially the first 2 weeks of this Gemini season, it's really important to take advantage of the fact that as the quicker moving planets move into Gemini, they're forming a trine aspect to Pluto, which a trine aspect to Pluto it is nothing to be ignored. You want to pay attention to it because it is just a gift of empowerment. And over the past year, as Pluto has been playing along and just getting into Aquarius, we've been trying to get our bearings of the profound change that Pluto is bringing. And for you with Pisces rising, this profound change that Pluto is bringing is around your own understanding of yourself, the most hidden sides of who you are, your unconscious psychological patterns, your unaware spirituality. There's some profound opening and change happening in that area for you. And as we move into Gemini season, that profound change is empowering you around your connections with home, family, ancestry. There's something really coming to light in a very positive way at this point.
Hmm. Yeah, I was just thinking this is a little bit of a funny one because I think, certainly in the northern hemisphere, we're coming to the end of spring and it's a time when things are really lifting and lightening. But what's interesting is that, those of you with Pisces rising, you have Gemini in the fourth house. So it's a little bit more of a introspective, I don't know. It's not quite as light and fluffy as some of the other signs maybe get to exist in. So it's a little bit of like it's time to be chatty and social, but then it's also time to be private because you're a Pisces rising person. So there's a little bit of a contradiction in there. But I do like how Pluto, as you've said, Laurie, it brings in this empowerment to that because I think it does imply just a little bit of a lightening internally, even if you're not buzzing around super socially. I mean, you might be, but that's not so much the question. The question is more, can you find that lightness inside of you? Can you lift out of whatever the heavier thing was during Taurus season, where there was more challenge associated with this, and you were being pushed to use your voice in a new way. And now you can kind of take a step back and just enjoy maybe the lift of that internal heaviness. Maybe that's what it's more about. And I don't know how it'll affect you externally and socially, but the key piece here is a nice flow of energy internally, a nice recognition of whatever those churning away processes in the subconscious, that they're actually leading you on a path of empowerment, not to something else. So that's what's really coming up for me in this one. So interesting. And
Yeah.
I just keep thinking about too how the 12th house is, yeah, it's your subconscious and all the things that are hidden, but it's also your relationship with the collective,
Mm.
and what are the pressures that the collective are putting on you, that you may or may not feel. It just depends where you are in your life. But it's yeah, this is a little bit of an interesting one. So pay attention to your intuition at this time. I see some big insights of intuition just coming quickly, and just enjoy those, and talk about them with other people and share it, because they're bright and shiny.
Yeah, I just keep thinking about that deep shift going on inside of you and how that can support the core of you and your connections with family maybe. It is an interesting one. I like it. In the comments, let us know what you think and listen to the early part of the video where we really go week to week. Be sure you've listened to that because that'll give you a lot more information as well. And I think with that, we are just about finished with our conversation, Jenny.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Wow, we did it.
Yes. Thank you, Lori. Thank you for those of you who are watching. Really appreciate it. And look for our next video on the full moon in Sagittarius. So
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Bye-bye.
thank you.